What if the water park you worked at was never just a water park? Daniel thought he was simply a night guard tasked with watching over an abandoned amusement park during its off-seasons. But beneath the cracked slides and drained pools, something ancient was waking. As rules are broken and people begin to vanish, Daniel descends into a nightmare of shifting flesh, endless mouths, and a living park that hungers for more than just victims. It wants to replace them. Stay with us as we uncover the horrifying truth buried beneath the hollow below. The first time I heard it, the faint scratching from under the water, I told myself it was the wind. It wasn't. I'd been living at Red Hollow Water Park for 14 winters now. 14 winters of wind slicing through dead trees, of rain hissing against cracked fiberglass slides, of frost creeping up the aluminum walls of my trailer like pale fingers. And always, always that pool. That impossible pool. I stood outside my trailer that evening, watching as the last light bled out of the New Mexico sky. The sun dipped beneath the skeletal remains of the Astro missile slide, its twisted metal spine clawing at the horizon like some enormous beast frozen mid-submission. The air smelled like chlorine and old rubber. The wind carried faint creaks from distant rusted structures. Movements I'd long since convinced myself were harmless, but the scratching tonight was different. It wasn't from the wind. It came from beneath. The surface of the main pool barely rippled. Still, I stared at it longer than usual, my breath forming tight little clouds that dissolved into the cold night air. The pool was massive, far too large for a park this small, a leftover from some overly ambitious expansion plan decades earlier. They'd covered half of it with a retractable blue vinyl tarp years ago, but most of the time it sat open now, exposing the black water beneath, water so dark it seemed to drink the light. I heard the scratching again. Faint, wet. It stopped as quickly as it had begun. I exhaled slowly and forced myself to turn away. Another winter, another contract, another check. That was how I justified it. The management didn't care what happened here as long as someone was on site and nothing caught fire. They barely even bothered to check in anymore. The last interaction I'd had was the envelope slipped into my mailbox a week ago, with another government-issued paycheck inside. On the back of the envelope, scrawled in faint blue ink, was a phone number I didn't recognize. No name, no note, just the number. I hadn't called it yet. Some part of me didn't want to know who might answer. Inside my trailer, I pulled the heavy curtains closed, locking out the view of the pool, my little safe zone. The battered leather couch, the flickering TV screen playing old VHS tapes, the small electric heater buzzing like a nervous insect. It smelled faintly of bleach and mildew, but it was home, or at least the closest thing to it. I poured a whiskey, cheap stuff but strong enough, and sat down. The TV displayed static for a few seconds before snapping into the middle of some late-night game show rerun. The noise was comforting in a way, something alive in this place where everything else had died or been abandoned. My hand drifted to the coffee table where an old Polaroid lay face down. I flipped it over. Denise. Her face stared up at me, slightly blurred, her smile frozen in time. She couldn't have been more than 17 when the photo was taken, back when she worked summers here, like me. Like we all did, before the tunnels swallowed her, before the search parties stopped, before the headlines faded. I shoved the photo aside. The heater clicked off suddenly, making the silence in the room almost physical. I heard the wind again, but mixed with it, something else. A soft, rasping sound. I froze, my pulse tapping against the inside of my throat. It was coming from the kitchen. I stood up, bottle still in hand, and crept forward. The kitchen wasn't large, just a narrow space with a worn Formica counter, 2 cabinets, and a tiny stainless steel sink that had long since stopped draining properly. But the noise wasn't coming from the sink. It was on the table. A clear plastic bag sat there that hadn't been there an hour ago. The bag was bloated, sealed at the top with a red zip tie. Inside floated the waterlogged body of a small animal, a raccoon or maybe a large rodent, twisted unnaturally as if it had drowned. Its fur had begun sloughing off, its eyes sunken and black. The smell hit me like a hammer, sweet and putrid, like death left too long in the heat. I stumbled back, bile rising. My brain rushed to find some explanation. Hadn't brought it in. No one had entered the trailer. The doors were locked, always locked. My hand fumbled for a trash bag. I sealed the plastic corpse inside, double-bagged it, and hauled it outside to the dumpster as quickly as my shaking legs allowed. But even after it was gone, the stench clung to me. I stripped my jacket off and threw it into the utility shed nearby, too nauseated to care if I ever retrieved it. I couldn't sleep after that. I sat up most of the night, whiskey burning my throat, eyes darting toward the door every time the wind howled. I kept telling myself, animals wander in, things happen. Maybe it was there the whole time and I'd just missed it, but I knew better. Just after 2 a.m., I finally dozed off in the chair. When I woke, it was to a sharp metallic click. My eyes snapped open. The door latch to the trailer jiggled once. I stayed frozen in the chair, my breath shallow, straining to hear over the hammering of my own pulse. The latch jiggled again, softer this time. Then, silence. The wind rattled the trailer, nothing more. My eyes darted toward the curtains, closed tight, no light leaking through. But I felt something on the other side. Standing there, listening, minutes passed. Finally, I forced myself up and slid quietly to the window. I pinched a corner of the curtain and pulled it back an inch. Nothing. Empty. Just the skeletal silhouette of the Waterpark bathed in moonlight. But when I turned to check the front door, my stomach dropped. The zipper to my emergency tent, pitched just outside for nights when the trailer became too claustrophobic, was closed. I hadn't zipped it before. I know I hadn't. My body locked up, sweat prickling my skin despite the cold. My mind sprinted in two opposite directions, one voice assuring me I had simply forgotten, another whispering that something was inside. I grabbed my keys and flashlight and moved as slowly and quietly as I could toward the tent. The nylon walls rustled lightly in the wind. I hesitated, gripping the zipper. My fingers trembled. The tent bulged slightly, like something shifted inside. I pulled the zipper down an inch. Silence. Another inch. Then I heard it. A faint rustle, something moving just beneath the fabric. I yanked the zipper fully open and shone my light inside. Empty. Utterly empty. But my relief evaporated as quickly as it arrived, because as I stepped back, a shape pressed into the side of the tent from outside. A pale hand, fingers unnaturally long and thin, splayed against the nylon. The pressure bowed the fabric inward, inches from my face. The fingers twitched slightly, almost curious. I couldn't scream, couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The hand slowly slid downward, leaving no prints behind, and then it was gone. By dawn, the world outside looked almost painfully ordinary. The weak desert sun cast long shadows across the abandoned park. The twisted skeletons of rides stretched against a pale sky, their paint long since peeled away. If it weren't for the pounding in my chest, I might have convinced myself nothing had happened, that maybe it was all some whiskey-soaked nightmare. But the hand, the fingers. No animal has fingers like that. I made coffee with shaking hands, ignoring the bitter taste. I hadn't dared to close my eyes after the tent incident. Instead, I sat upright in my trailer for hours listening for any hint that it had returned. Nothing. Only the endless creaking of the wind through broken steel and sagging plastic tarps. I kept glancing at the tent outside. The fabric hung loose now, undisturbed. Just nylon, swaying gently, like it had never been touched. Like the hand pressing through it had simply dissolved with the dark. I wasn't fool enough to go check it again. Around 8 a.m., my old radio crackled. The voice of Mr. Redfield, the site manager, came through, as dry and mechanical as always. "Morning check-in, Mercer. All's well?" I hesitated, my mouth dry. My instincts screamed to tell him everything. But what was there to tell? A hand outside a tent? No footprints, no damage, nothing stolen, and me, half drunk, overtired, probably losing my mind, the kind of thing that gets you replaced. Or worse. "Yeah," I croaked. "All clear." A brief pause. "Copy that. Keep an eye on the weather. Cold front moving in tonight. Roger." The line clicked off. That was the way it always went. They didn't want details. They wanted plausible deniability. As long as the place didn't burn down, they could keep cashing their checks from whoever still owned this cursed slice of dirt. I stepped outside and forced myself into my daily routine. Morning inspection rounds. Every corner of the park. I started with the Astro Missile slide, as always. Its gaping mouth yawned toward me, streaked with grime and flecks of something darker. The slide had been shut down since Denise. 15 years ago, she'd slipped into that tunnel and never came out. Not alive, anyway. Her body wasn't recovered until years later, when a new crew came through trying to refurbish the old slides. They'd found her skeleton wedged deep inside a maintenance crawl space, lost in the darkness, desperate for an exit that never existed. I stood at the base of the towering structure now, my boots crunching over frost-coated gravel. The wind whispered through the twisted tubes overhead, making them moan like hollow throats. The entrance was chained shut, padlocked years ago, but the rust on the metal links made me uneasy, like they'd been disturbed, loosened. I checked the lock, still sealed, still cold to the touch. As I turned to leave, a soft splatter drew my gaze downward. A single droplet of water landed on my wrist, then another. The sky was clear, no clouds above. The droplets came from the slide itself. Condensation? Rainwater trapped inside? Maybe, or maybe not. My stomach clenched. That's when I noticed the small pool gathering at the slide's base. The liquid wasn't clear. It was tinged faintly red, diluted but unmistakable. Blood. No. I shook my head hard, forcing my eyes away. No. Just rust water, oxidized metal. My brain was playing tricks again. Sleep deprivation, alcohol, stress. They all had claws. I left the slide and made my way across the central walkway toward the castle pool, the old kiddie section. Even now, after all these years, it remained the eeriest part of the park. The colorful plastic towers and winding bridges were sun-faded and brittle, like toys left too long in the sun. The pool itself, partially drained, sat like a shallow crater filled with murky, stagnant rainwater. Algae bloomed thick and green along the edges, swirled with wind-blown debris. I avoided looking directly at the water. That pool had taken things too. A lone bird called out somewhere in the distance. I barely registered it as my eyes landed on something at the far end of the playground. Footprints. Small, bare, human. They trailed from the edge of the drained pool up toward one of the castle towers. The prints were still damp, fresh. I froze. My pulse hammered louder than the wind in my ears. I scanned the horizon, expecting, hoping to see someone. Another trespasser, a hiker who'd gotten lost, anyone to give me an excuse. There was nothing. The footprints ended beneath the castle's main archway. Beyond that, empty plastic tunnels gaped like hollow throats. I should have called it in. I should have turned back to my trailer and locked the door. Instead, I followed them. Inside the castle structure, the air grew colder, damp. The plastic walls absorbed sound, making every creak of my boots echo back at me in sharp whispers. The trail of wet footprints faded as the floor dried, leaving only my breath hanging in the chill. Suddenly, a faint sound. Movement. From above, I jerked my flashlight upward. A figure hunched near the top of the tower. Small, pale. A girl. She crouched against the far railing, unmoving. Her long, wet hair clinging to her face. Her limbs were folded tightly against her chest, trembling. She looked like she had been sitting there for hours. Or days. "Hey?" My voice cracked through the hollow space. "Hey! Are you okay?" No response. I started climbing the brittle plastic stairs, my boots slipping on the damp surface. The higher I climbed, the stronger the stench became. Mold, decay, and something sharper beneath it. The girl didn't move. As I reached the platform, I kept my flashlight trained on her face. She was young, college age maybe. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, staring out toward the distant pool like she didn't even register my presence. Her skin was pale, mottled with bruises and scratches. Her lips moved slightly, but no words came. I reached out, hesitant. "You're safe now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm gonna get you out of here, okay?" Her head jerked suddenly toward me, not aggressive, but desperate. Her eyes darted around frantically, and then she whispered in a dry, broken voice, "It's in the water." Her gaze locked onto mine, wide and terrified. "It watches us." My blood turned to ice. The castle trembled slightly beneath us, the old plastic groaning in the wind, and somewhere beneath the frozen surface of the pool beyond, I felt it, watching. Her words haunted me long after I pulled her down from the tower. "It's in the water. It watches us." The girl barely had the strength to stand as I guided her back through the brittle, groaning plastic tunnels of the castle pool. Her legs shook beneath her. She leaned heavily into my arm, her breathing shallow, erratic. Her skin was ice cold, like she'd been submerged for hours. I didn't press her with questions yet. I just needed to get her somewhere safe. As safe as anything could be here. Back at my trailer, I wrapped her in blankets, turned the heater on full blast, and poured her a cup of instant coffee with trembling hands. She clutched the mug like a lifeline, but barely drank. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor, lost somewhere I couldn't reach. The sun outside was high now, its pale light doing little to cut through the heavy clouds rolling in. The forecast had been right. Another storm was on its way. "What's your name?" I finally asked. Her lips parted as if answering required enormous effort. "Katie," she whispered. I nodded, trying to keep my voice calm. "Katie, how did you get in here?" Silence stretched. Her knuckles whitened around the mug. "Were you with anyone else?" Her eyes filled with sudden panic at that question, darting toward the curtained window. Her breathing quickened. "They're gone," she choked out, voice raw and brittle. "They took them. I heard them screaming, but then..." Her words broke into shallow sobs. I swallowed hard, forcing my own panic down. She wasn't making sense, but deep down, every fiber of my being knew that she was. "Who took them?" I asked softly. Her eyes finally met mine. "You've seen it too," she said, voice barely audible. "Haven't you?" The air inside the trailer thickened. I didn't answer. I couldn't, but my silence was answer enough. Her sobs faded into shallow, shuddering breaths. The heater buzzed in the background, filling the silence with its monotonous drone. I stood, pacing across the small space, my mind racing. Trespassing teens weren't uncommon here. The local kids thought this place was some kind of urban legend playground, but this was different. She hadn't just snuck in to film some TikToks or tag walls with graffiti. She was hiding, running from something I couldn't explain even to myself. I glanced toward my desk where the old park files sat in a warped cardboard box. Half the records here were incomplete, most of the incident reports missing, and the few that remained had been carefully edited, as if someone had intentionally scrubbed the real story clean. But I knew the real story, because I was here when it started, because of Denise. 15 years ago, she'd gone into the Astro missile slide during a routine maintenance check. She never came out. For days, search teams scoured the park, tearing open sections of the fiberglass tubing, draining tanks, checking crawl spaces. They found nothing. It was as if the tunnel had swallowed her whole, until years later, when they finally found her bones, wedged inside a maintenance shaft deep beneath the slide's lowest curve. Desiccated, twisted, as if she'd been alive down there far longer than anyone should have been. The official report blamed a tragic accident, a maintenance failure. But everyone who worked here, Those of us who stayed behind when the media moved on. We knew better. I was 22 then, a dumb kid with no better options and too much debt. I stayed long after I should have left. Now, I was the only one left. I glanced at Katie again. She was staring at the floor, but her fingers now traced slow, anxious patterns across the side of her mug, like she was trying to ground herself in something real. I sat across from her, lowering my voice. Katie, where were you last night? Her eyes fluttered closed, as if reliving it was almost unbearable. We came through the north fence, she whispered. The one near the service road. It was supposed to be quick, just a video, some stupid video. She paused, swallowing hard. There were 4 of us, me, Josh, Olivia, and Dean. We made it to the castle pool. Josh, her voice broke. Josh thought it would be funny to swim out to the middle platform. You know, that old plastic fort? I nodded slowly. That's when it started. She shivered beneath the blankets, the color draining from her face. The water. It wasn't right. It started to rise, slowly, like it was breathing. And then we saw something. Underneath? Her breath hitched, tears spilling over. It was huge. Not like a fish or anything alive, just moving, rolling beneath us. I clenched my fists. My mouth had gone dry. Dean tried to help Josh back, but the raft flipped, and then it pulled him under. Just like that. Gone. Her voice dropped to a terrified whisper. I saw something come up after that. In the water. A face, but not a face. Like, she struggled to find the words. Like skin stretched over something too big. Like eyes under the surface, but they weren't eyes. I ran. I didn't stop running until I got up there. She gestured weakly toward the direction of the castle pool tower. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady the shaking in my hands. It's been here a long time, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes widened. You know what it is? I shook my head. No, I admitted, but I've seen pieces of it, enough to know it's not done yet. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the trailer's thin aluminum frame. A fresh spray of rain splattered against the small window, followed by a distant roll of thunder. The cold front was arriving fast. I stood and moved to the window, pulling the curtain back a fraction. The park stood silent under the gray sky, but something shifted in the shadows near the far end of the drained astromissile slide. I squinted. Movement. A brief glimpse of something large slipping beneath the edge of the tarp-covered pool. The scratching had started again, this time louder. The wind battered the trailer walls harder as I stared out through the narrow slit in the curtains. The movement near the Astro missile slide had disappeared as quickly as it came, like a shadow sinking into deeper shadows. But I knew better than to think it was gone. Behind me, Katie let out a quiet, broken breath. She hadn't moved since she finished her story, sitting like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Her wide, hollowed eyes followed me when I stepped away from the window. I shouldn't have come here, she whispered, barely audible beneath the groan of the wind. We shouldn't have come at all. You didn't know, I said quietly, pulling on my jacket. No one ever really knows what this place is until it's too late. I grabbed the set of keys from the hook by the door. My fingers hesitated over the flashlight before stuffing it into my jacket pocket. I wasn't about to wait until nightfall to figure out how deep this went. Not with 2 people still missing, not with the scratching getting louder. Where are you going? Katie's voice cracked, a sharp note of fear breaking through the flatness of her exhaustion. Back to the slide, I said. If there's a chance your friends are still out there, I need to check. She shook her head violently, gripping the blanket tighter around her frame. You can't go back there. It's waiting for you. I know. My voice came out flat, honest, but it always is. The rain was coming down harder now, fat drops exploding into the dirt like tiny detonations. The clouds above churned thick and low, as if the whole sky wanted to collapse in on this place. I pulled my hood up and headed toward the towering ruin of the Astro missile slide. Each step squelched through the mud, my boots sinking deeper into the soft ground. The old pathways were little more than broken concrete slabs now, jagged teeth rising from the earth. The steel frame of the slide loomed above, its twisted neck vanishing into the sky. The padlock on the main hatch was still secure. Or at least, it looked that way from a distance. I crouched at the base of the slide's support beams, studying the ground. That's when I saw them. Small, wet, barefoot tracks. Exactly like the ones I'd seen near the castle pool. Fresh. Too fresh. The wind screamed louder, and for a moment I could swear the sound wasn't the wind at all, but something whispering or breathing inside the curves of the slide above me. I followed the tracks around the far side of the slide, where the maintenance access tunnel jutted out from the lower portion. The service hatch hung open, swaying slightly on its rusted hinges. The padlock lay in the mud, shattered. My gut clenched. Someone, or something, had already been inside. I aimed my flashlight into the narrow shaft. The beam barely pierced the darkness, illuminating only the slick, algae-smeared fiberglass walls that curved endlessly ahead. The maintenance tunnel was supposed to be off-limits, a confined artery that snaked beneath the slide itself. But long ago we'd learned it was where the bodies ended up when the water took them. Or at least, that's where they were sometimes found. Denise had been found here, crushed between the slide walls 15 years after she vanished. Her bones gnawed and twisted like something had fought to drag her deeper, something patient. I stepped inside. The air inside the tunnel was thick and wet, the walls dripping with condensation despite the chill outside. Every few feet, rivulets of water trickled down from unseen cracks, pooling around my boots. The deeper I moved, the louder the scratching became, no longer faint, no longer distant, closer. I swallowed hard, flashlight beam jittering as my grip trembled. The tunnel twisted ahead, the curve obscuring what was beyond. My breath fogged in front of me. My own footsteps echoed back unnaturally, like something was repeating them half a beat behind me. I paused. The scratching stopped, then a new sound, something wet shifting ahead. A dragging noise. A faint, low whimper that didn't belong to any animal I knew. Josh? My voice bounced off the tight walls, sounding smaller than I'd intended. No answer. I forced myself forward, every nerve screaming to turn back. The tunnel curved sharply again, and as I rounded it, the beam of my flashlight struck something on the ground. A shoe. Small. Canvas. Bright neon green. Too clean, too new. It sat upright in the shallow puddle like it had been carefully placed there. Katie's voice whispered in my mind. It took them. I crouched to pick it up. The fabric was damp, but not yet waterlogged. The smell hit me immediately. A faint sweetness beneath the damp. Blood. A wet plop echoed from ahead. I snapped the flashlight forward. Something retreated just beyond the edge of the beam, a slithering mass too fast to fully register, but big. Heavy. I heard the splash of its movement, then silence again. The tunnel seemed to breathe around me, the air pressing in thicker with every second. The temperature dropped another degree. My skin prickled as I realized. The water at my feet was rising, inch by inch, like the entire tunnel was filling. I stepped back instinctively, only to hear the water behind me lapping against the tunnel entrance. It was rising from both ends, trapping me. I spun back toward the dark, toward the movement, toward where the footprints had led. Then I saw it. A face. No, not a face. The suggestion of one pressed against the semi-translucent slide wall ahead, flattened, pale, like a sheet of flesh stretched over some massive thing behind it. Two dark indentations where eyes should be, wide and staring, but wrong. They weren't eyes, just impressions. Deep pools of nothingness. The mouth pulsed open slightly, not in breath, but as if testing the barrier between us. A slow, deliberate scrape came from the other side of the fiberglass, sharp, like claws or bone dragging along plastic. I stumbled backward, my breath catching. My flashlight flickered, and in that flicker, for half a heartbeat, I thought I saw something else behind it. Dozens of smaller shapes writhing, like pale limbs swimming through the black water that filled whatever impossible space existed beyond the wall. The light cut out entirely. I didn't scream, couldn't. All I could do was feel the water rising around my knees and listen as the scratching came closer. I don't remember pulling myself out of the tunnel. One moment the water was licking at my thighs, cold and heavy, and the next, I was crawling into the thin morning light, like a man surfacing from a nightmare. My breath came in heaving gasps, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest. My jeans clung to my legs, soaked and heavy, streaked with filth from the tunnel's walls. My flashlight dangled uselessly from its strap, the beam flickering in and out like a dying eye. Behind me, the hatch to the maintenance tunnel swayed slightly in the breeze, as if mocking me. The face in the wall was still burned into my skull, those indentations where eyes should have been, staring without seeing, or maybe seeing far too much. I staggered to my feet. My boots squelched with every step as I stumbled back toward the trailer, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever still waited beneath the park. Katie was sitting exactly where I left her, eyes wide, her skin sickly pale under the flickering light. She didn't speak when I entered, but her gaze locked onto me instantly, taking in my soaked clothes and my shaking hands. "It's there," I rasped. "It's real." Her lower lip trembled. She didn't need to say it. We both knew. I peeled off my jacket, dropping it in a soggy heap near the door. My mind was spinning. The creature wasn't just some accident of nature, not some forgotten animal trapped beneath the infrastructure of the park. No, this was something older, something deliberate, like the park had been built on top of it, or worse, built for it. The knocking at the trailer door came an hour later, 3 sharp raps. Katie flinched, shrinking deeper into the couch cushions. My chest tightened. No one should be here. No one. I hesitated a long moment before inching toward the door. My fingers hovered above the lock. Another knock, slower this time. Almost polite. "Daniel?" A voice called from the other side. Young, nervous, male. "Hey, look, we're not here to cause any trouble, man. Just need help." I blinked, confused. Peering through the small peephole, I saw 3 people standing outside. 2 young men, maybe college age, and 1 girl who clung to the taller guy's arm like her legs barely held her weight. They weren't security. They weren't law enforcement. Trespassers. I cracked the door an inch, keeping the chain locked. "What the hell are you doing here?" The taller guy, shaggy brown hair, pale face, gave me an apologetic smile. "We didn't mean to break in, sir. The fence was already cut. We were just filming some urban explorer stuff and then things got bad. Real bad." His friend, shorter, fidgeted behind him, darting glances around as though expecting something to pounce from the shadows. The girl was silent. She looked dazed, her hoodie soaked, strands of hair stuck to her cheeks. Katie stood now too, hovering behind me. Her breath caught when she saw the trio. Her eyes locked on the girl. "Olivia," Katie whispered, her voice breaking. The girl outside blinked sluggishly, then recognition sparked in her face. "Katie?" I unlatched the door and swung it open fully. The taller boy moved first, half carrying Olivia inside. The other guy followed, practically tripping over himself to get through the door before I slammed it shut behind them. Katie rushed to Olivia, gripping her in a desperate hug, both of them shaking. The taller boy wiped his wet palms on his jeans. "I'm Dean," he said quickly. "That's Tommy. And, well, you know Olivia." I stared at them, sizing them up. "Where's Josh?" Dean's face went pale. Tommy looked like he might vomit. Dean swallowed hard. "We don't know," he whispered. "He got him. Last night. Same as—" He stopped himself, his eyes darting toward Olivia. She was sobbing into Katie's shoulder now, repeating Josh's name like a prayer. "It pulled him under," Tommy added quietly, voice flat with shock. "There was nothing we could do. He was just gone." The weight of it settled like lead in the room. The storm outside had fully arrived now, hammering rain against the metal walls in relentless waves. Lightning flashed through the curtained windows. The whole trailer shuddered with the wind. I sat heavily in the chair opposite them, trying to steady my breath, trying to anchor my thoughts. This was spiraling too fast. Katie gently guided Olivia to sit beside her. She rubbed slow circles on her back while Olivia stared at the floor, barely blinking. "You kids shouldn't have come here," I said quietly. Dean nodded, his jaw tight. "Yeah, we figured that out." I studied him for a moment, then leaned forward. "Did you see it? The thing in the water?" Dean's eyes flicked to mine, and something raw flashed across his face. Fear? Guilt? Maybe both? "Parts of it," he said. I don't even know how to describe it. It was like something too big for this place, like it was everywhere at once, under the surface, moving. "It followed us," Tommy whispered. "Even after we ran, we could feel it." I rubbed my hands over my face. My temples throbbed. The patterns were too familiar, too close to Denise's story, to what I saw last night in the tunnel. And now, more kids were tangled in the same nightmare. "I don't think this place was ever meant to be a water park," I muttered, half to myself. "Not really." Dean glanced up sharply. "What do you mean?" "This land," I said, voice low. "There's something wrong with it, and someone, a long time ago, either found it or brought it here. The slides, the pools, they're just decoration, distractions." The storm roared louder, rattling the windows like skeletal fingers drumming on glass. A sharp crack of thunder made everyone flinch. The lights flickered. Katie's breath quickened. "Daniel," she whispered, barely audible. I followed her gaze toward the small security monitor mounted by the door. The camera feed showed the main walkway leading toward the castle pool. Someone was standing there, or rather, something. Even through the rain-smeared lens, I could make out its shape. Tall, thin, arms too long, swaying unnaturally with the wind. Its head cocked slightly, as if listening. Lightning illuminated the screen for a brief instant, and I saw its face, or the absence of one. A smooth sheet of pale flesh stretched tight across where a mouth or eyes should be. Dean cursed under his breath. Olivia whimpered. The feed flickered once, twice, then cut to static. The power died. And then came the knocking again. 3 sharp raps. The knocking continued, steady and deliberate, as if whoever or whatever stood outside the trailer knew exactly where we were and how much time it had. 3 sharp raps. A pause. 3 more. The storm outside howled louder, but the sound seemed distant compared to the rhythmic tapping. Every head in the room had turned toward the door, the air inside growing thick enough to choke on. Olivia whimpered softly beside Katie, her fingers digging into the blanket like she was trying to tear through it. No one said a word. The power was still dead. The only illumination came from the faint lightning that occasionally flickered through the seams of the heavy. Each flash threw long, distorted shadows across the trailer's cramped interior. My throat tightened. I forced myself to move, taking slow, measured steps toward the door. Dean stood suddenly, his voice sharp but trembling. "Don't open it." "I'm not," I said, barely above a whisper. I pressed my eye to the peephole. For a moment, all I saw was the warped distortion of the rain-smeared lens. But then, as if it had sensed me looking, the thing shifted into view. It was closer now, only feet away, towering over the small wooden porch. The rain slicked its pale skin, causing the surface to glisten unnaturally. No face, no eyes, just smooth stretching flesh where features should have been. Its head tilted again, like it was studying the door, considering how much force it might take to breach it. The knocking stopped. Instead, a new sound followed, a slow, dragging noise across the doorframe, like nails or bone, scraping along the metal edge. I backed away, heart hammering, my pulse roaring in my ears. Dean stared at me, waiting for some unspoken cue. Tommy had shrunk into the far corner, hands over his ears, eyes squeezed shut. "We can't stay here," I finally whispered. "Not if it's found us." "Where can we go?" Katie's voice broke. "It's everywhere." "No," I said firmly. "Not everywhere. It stays close to the water, the deeper pools. It uses the tunnels to move. We head toward the maintenance sheds, up on the hill, away from the main park. Dean swallowed. That's... what? Half a mile? In this storm? Better than waiting here. Ah, the trailer suddenly jolted, as if something heavy had slammed into its side. Olivia screamed. The thin metal walls groaned under the impact. A second hit followed, louder, stronger. Dean didn't hesitate this time. He grabbed Olivia's arm, pulling her to her feet. We're going, now. Another impact rocked the trailer, this time strong enough to knock over one of the kitchen chairs. The storm seemed to roar louder, or maybe it was my blood pounding as adrenaline surged. I flung open the back hatch, the emergency exit leading out behind the trailer. Cold rain and wind slammed into us immediately. The maintenance hill loomed in the distance, barely visible through sheets of water and rolling fog. A flash of lightning lit the grounds for a brief second, enough for me to see that the thing wasn't at the back door yet. We ran. The mud sucked at our feet with every step. I held Katie's arm to keep her upright as we stumbled across broken concrete paths and waterlogged grass. Dean and Olivia followed close behind, with Tommy bringing up the rear, muttering rapid prayers under his breath between gasps for air. The shriek came from somewhere behind us, high-pitched and wrong, like metal tearing mixed with something alive. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My only job was to keep moving forward, dragging Katie with me through the downpour. The maintenance sheds loomed ahead, their faded aluminum siding reflecting brief flashes of lightning. I fumbled with the ring of keys in my jacket pocket, my hands numb and slick with rain. My breath came in sharp, burning pulls, and my chest felt like it might implode. Come on! Come on! Another screech behind us, closer this time. I found the right key by sheer luck and shoved it into the lock. The door resisted for a second, swollen from moisture, but then gave way. We tumbled inside together, slamming the metal door behind us. The space inside was cramped, cluttered with old tools, empty chemical drums, and broken pool equipment. But it was solid. No windows. No direct access to water. For now, it was enough. The five of us collapsed onto the cold concrete floor, gasping, shaking, soaking wet. The storm continued to batter the outside, but here, inside these thin metal walls, it almost felt like silence. Almost. Dean finally broke it. What the hell is that thing? His voice cracked. His face was pale, eyes wide with something beyond simple fear now, something closer to horror. I wiped rainwater from my face, trying to calm my heartbeat. I don't know exactly, but I've been living with it for years. You knew? Tommy croaked, barely able to raise his voice. You knew this was here, and you stayed? I didn't have much choice. Katie's voice came next, trembling but stronger than before. You've seen it before? I nodded slowly. The first time was when Denise went missing. She wasn't the first, either, just the one they couldn't cover up. Olivia whimpered again, hugging herself tightly. I could feel the weight of their stares pressing into me, but I kept my focus on the facts, the things I'd pieced together during countless sleepless nights over 14 winters. This place was never safe, I said. This whole park was built on top of it, or because of it. I don't think it was ever about the rides or the pools. I think it was always about feeding that thing beneath. Dean shook his head, voice raw. Feeding it? What the hell is it eating? People. Silence. The word hung there like a physical object in the room. Cold. Heavy. No one ever cared what happened here, I added, bitterness slipping into my voice. Every time someone disappeared, they shut it down for a while, wrote reports that went missing, then reopened like nothing happened. But why? Katie whispered. Before I could answer, a heavy bang shook the shed. The metal wall buckled inward slightly. A deep, vibrating groan followed, not from the storm, but from something massive dragging itself closer. Olivia started crying again. Tommy was frozen, eyes darting toward every corner as if looking for an escape that didn't exist. It knows we're here, Dean whispered. The banging came again, louder this time. We can't stay, I said. This won't hold. Dean looked at me, his expression wild. "Where do we go?" I swallowed hard. "Down." The banging on the metal wall stopped as suddenly as it had begun. For a few seconds, there was nothing but the sound of the rain pounding against the roof. No breathing, no scraping, no movement. That silence was somehow worse. We stood frozen, all five of us, barely daring to breathe. My heart hammered inside my chest, the pulse so loud it almost drowned out the storm. Dean's eyes darted toward me, searching for a plan I didn't have. Then we heard it. Soft, wet dragging sounds circling the shed outside. Slow, methodical, as if it was tracing the walls, feeling its way, learning the structure. "It's playing with us," Katie whispered. No one argued. I forced myself to stay calm, to think past the primal urge to curl up and wait for death. That was what this thing wanted. It hunted fear. It fed on hesitation. "We go down," I said again, more firmly this time. Dean frowned. "Down where? There's no basement." "There is," I replied. "Maintenance access, beneath the filtration rooms." He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "You want to go closer to the water?" "It's the only way to move without being seen," I said. "The filtration tunnels connect to most of the old infrastructure. If we're lucky, we can get far enough away while it's still hunting outside." Tommy shook his head, pale and sweating. "Or we walk right into its nest." "It's not hunting in the tunnels," I said. "Not yet. It watches the pools. It watches up here. Underground is our only chance." Dean glanced toward Olivia, who was trembling uncontrollably. She wasn't going to make it much longer above ground, that much was clear. Staying here meant certain death. Moving gave us something. A slim thread of hope. He finally nodded. "Lead the way." I grabbed the heavy wrench from the corner of the shed, my only weapon, and crossed the room to a rusted metal hatch set into the far corner of the floor. It had been welded shut years ago when they stopped using the lower filtration systems. But I'd pried it open once before, out of curiosity that had kept me awake for years afterward. The hatch creaked as I forced it open now, revealing a narrow set of corroded steel rungs descending into darkness. A faint wave of damp, metallic air rose up to greet us. Katie moved first. She didn't hesitate. She swung her legs over the edge and started down. Dean lowered Olivia next, carefully guiding her onto the ladder while Tommy held the flashlight above them. The beam flickered but held. I followed last, closing the hatch behind us as quietly as I could. The moment the door sealed, the banging started again, violently this time, as though the thing outside sensed its prey slipping away. We hurried. The metal rungs groaned beneath our weight. The descent was longer than I remembered, maybe 30-40 feet straight down into the belly of the park. At the bottom was a narrow concrete tunnel, barely wide enough for two people to walk shoulder to shoulder. Old maintenance lights lined the ceiling, but most were dead. The ones still working buzzed weakly, casting the passage in a sickly yellow glow. The air was thick and damp, filled with the stale odor of chemicals, mildew, and something else. Something sour that turned my stomach. "This place looks like it hasn't been touched in decades," Dean muttered. "It hasn't," I said. "Not officially." We pressed forward, our footsteps echoing along the concrete corridor. The walls were slick with condensation, and every few yards rusted valves protruded like skeletal fingers from the piping. Katie spoke softly, her voice cutting through the suffocating quiet. "How far does this go?" "All the way under the castle pool," I answered. "Maybe farther. Some of these tunnels were built during the first construction phase, before they even opened the park. They expanded as they added more attractions on top." Dean glanced around nervously. "You've been down here before," I nodded. "Once." "And?" I didn't answer. We passed through an old security gate next, its turnstile long broken. The painted sign above had nearly flaked away, but you could still make out the faded letters. "Authorized personnel only." A distant rumble vibrated beneath our feet. For a terrifying moment, I thought it was the creature, but then I realized it was just the storm overhead. Even this far down, the earth shivered with every crack of thunder. The tunnel sloped downward as we advanced, the temperature dropping with every step. The deeper we went, the more the tunnel felt less like a man-made structure and more like something hollowed out by nature itself. The walls became uneven, damp patches spreading like bruises across the concrete. Eventually, we reached a large junction chamber. Several side tunnels branched off in opposite directions, their ends lost in shadow. I stopped. "This is it," I said. "This is as far as we go for now." Dean looked around uneasy. "Why stop here?" "Because past this point," my voice trailed off. I didn't want to finish the sentence, but I forced myself to. "Past this point, we're in its territory." Katie shivered. Olivia sank to the ground, her back against the wall, too exhausted to stand. "We wait here for now," I said. "Let the storm pass. Let it search above ground." For several long minutes, we sat in silence. Then Tommy whispered, his voice dry, cracking. "You said you've seen this before. All of this. But you stayed." I looked at him. He wasn't accusing me, not really, just trying to understand. "I thought I could live with it," I said, "if I followed the rules, if I stayed out of its way. But the rules change. Every year they change." Dean stared at me. "What rules?" I exhaled slowly. "Never enter the pools after dark. Never swim alone. Never enter the maintenance tunnels without permission. Never talk about the missing people. And above all," I paused, my voice almost trembling, "never stay longer than 6 seasons." Katie blinked, confused. "6 seasons?" I nodded. "This is my 6th winter." No one spoke after I said it. My 6th winter. The words hung there, heavy as stone, like I had confessed something unspeakable. Dean stared at me, his face a mixture of disbelief and quiet horror. Tommy was pale, his mouth slightly open like he was still processing what that meant. Even Katie, who had seen far more than she should have, couldn't fully comprehend it. 6 seasons. 6 winters. And I had stayed. Olivia's breathing was shallow, uneven, but she whispered the question everyone else was too afraid to say out loud. "Why?" I looked at her, at all of them, and for the first time in years I said it plainly. "Because I didn't know how to leave." They didn't understand. How could they? You didn't just leave this place. It wasn't a park you could clock out from. The longer you stayed, the more it dug into you. It got inside your head, your routine, your dreams, until leaving felt like suffocating. At first I told myself I was doing it for the paycheck, for my father who needed the money after my mother passed, for the student loans that kept piling up. But those were lies. Small lies that I clung to because the alternative was admitting I had let something in. And it never truly let go. I thought I was safe. I said quietly, if I followed the rules, if I stayed invisible. But it watches you anyway. Dean rubbed his hands together, shivering, his voice rough. "What is it? Why does it want people?" I shook my head. "I don't think it wants anything in the way we understand it. It's just here, like mold, like rot. This land was broken long before they built the park on top of it." Tommy swallowed hard. "Then why build here at all?" "Because they thought they could control it." My voice was low now, almost reverent, as if speaking too loudly would draw its attention again. Or maybe they wanted to feed it, keep it sleeping. Dean shook his head, the muscle in his jaw twitching. "Who's they?" "The original owners. The men who broke ground here 40 years ago. Some of them were part of that old church. The one they shut down after the drownings, Midtown Evangelical. Back when the county was still pretending this land wasn't cursed." Katie's eyes widened. "You mean the church that burned down?" I nodded. "It wasn't an accident." Thunder rumbled again above us, distant but steady, like the heartbeat of something older than weather. The silence thickened once more, and then the scratching returned. It started faintly, soft, barely audible but unmistakable. Long, deliberate drags of something sharp against the far concrete wall of the tunnel system, as if it had found another way down. Dean stiffened. How is it underground? It's always been underground, I said. That's where it lives when it's not hunting. The scratching grew louder, moving slowly along the curve of the adjoining tunnel. It wasn't rushing, it wasn't panicking, it was searching, and it was close. We need to move, I said. Move where? Tommy hissed. I pointed down one of the smaller, darker tunnels to our left. There's another exit point that connects to the old supply building. If we can reach it, we can break through to the surface. Dean helped Olivia up, wrapping an arm around her waist to keep her steady. Katie was right behind him, her face pale but determined. The concrete beneath our feet vibrated slightly as another distant bang echoed through the tunnels. It was probing for us. We moved quickly but quietly, our footsteps splashing in the thin film of water that coated the ground. Every small sound felt amplified in the narrow space. Our breathing, the drip of water from overhead pipes, the faint electric hum of dying bulbs. The tunnel narrowed further, forcing us into single file. My flashlight beam jittered across the walls, catching glimpses of old, faded warning signs. Authorized, personnel only, high voltage, no entry. Ahead, the passage split again. I hesitated for only a second before choosing the left tunnel. The right one dipped downward, back toward the filtration tanks, toward the water. I wanted nothing to do with what was waiting there. The air grew colder with each step, our breath visible in thin, panicked clouds. The scratching sounds had vanished for now, but we all knew better than to believe we'd lost it. It was patient. Always patient. Kaylee whispered behind me, barely audible. It's following us. I know, I said. Just keep moving. The passage suddenly opened into a wider chamber. This room had once been part of the maintenance hub for the water filtration system. Rusted machinery stood like corpses under the dim emergency lights, their once shiny surfaces eaten away by years of moisture and neglect. A control panel with shattered gauges sat crooked against one wall, and there, on the far end, was an old service hatch bolted shut with heavy crossbars. The exit. Dean exhaled sharply. There, that's got a lead outside. I rushed to the hatch and began tearing at the bolts. The metal groaned but held. Help me, I hissed. Dean and Tommy joined me, their hands slipping as we yanked and pulled against decades of rust and decay. Every second that ticked by felt like another invitation for it to catch us. Then, finally, a sharp snap echoed through the chamber as the last bolt sheared off. I heaved the door open. A blast of freezing air and rain hit us. We were outside again, or close enough. We'd emerged into the fenced storage yard behind the old pump house, now nothing more than twisted scrap and collapsed roofing. Lightning lit the sky again, and that's when I saw it. Standing beyond the fence, half shrouded by rain and mist, was not one, but several figures. All tall, all wrong. Their skin glistened pale under the rain, heads tilted slightly, as if listening, waiting, and worse, behind them, the ground itself seemed to shift. Bulge. Breathe, Katie gasped. There's more than one. My stomach turned to ice. The scratching had only been a distraction. The rain was coming sideways now, driving needles of cold against our skin as we stared across the chain-link fence at the impossible sight before us. Multiple figures, more than I could count. Their pale, skinless bodies stood motionless in the storm, each one slightly different in shape, but all wrong. Too tall, too thin, limbs that bent in ways no human skeleton should. Heads that craned toward us, tilting like they were curious, or maybe calculating, and beneath them, the ground itself pulsed, breathing as if something massive stirred just below the surface. With every beat, the soil swelled and receded like a lung struggling to fill. Dean was the first to break the silence, his voice cracking. There's more of them. Jesus Christ. Tommy let out a low, shaky moan. I thought it was just one. I couldn't tear my eyes away. For years I'd convinced myself it was one. One presence, one entity haunting this cursed patch of land. But seeing them now, multiplying like tumors rising from the ground, it was clear that was never true. The banging, the scratching, the faces pressed against the slide walls, all of it had been pieces of something far larger. This wasn't a creature. This was a colony. "It's not one thing," I whispered. "It's never been one thing." Katie clutched my arm tightly. "How do we get out of here?" Her voice trembled, not just from cold, but from a rising terror that no longer had anywhere left to hide. I forced myself to look away, scanning the fence for any kind of escape. The yard we'd climbed into was boxed in on 3 sides, the rear service building rising like a rusted mausoleum behind us. The only break in the chain link was a locked vehicle gate, thick with years of rust and chained tightly shut. Dean rushed toward it, yanking on the links like he could tear it open with sheer desperation. "It's locked," he shouted. "We're trapped in here." The figures across the fence remained perfectly still, heads cocked as if listening to our panic. "No," I said quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's another way. There's an access path behind the pump house. It leads back up toward the north perimeter." "How far?" Tommy's voice was barely a whisper. "Far enough." Lightning split the sky again, illuminating the colony for a brief, merciless instant. That's when one of them moved. It didn't walk. It glided. Like its legs weren't quite touching the ground, like it wasn't fully bound to gravity the way we were. The others shifted slightly behind it, a ripple of subtle motion that sent fresh adrenaline flooding my veins. "We're leaving," I said, my voice hard now. "Now!" Dean didn't argue this time. He grabbed Olivia, who could barely stand, and slung her arm over his shoulder. Tommy stayed right behind Katie, eyes darting wildly in every direction. We sprinted across the open yard toward the far side of the pump house. The access path was overgrown with years of neglect, but I could still see enough of its outline, cracked asphalt, half buried in dirt and weeds, leading up the hill toward the staff-only service road. As we ran, I could hear them moving behind us. Not fast, not frantic, just steady, like they knew we couldn't outrun them forever. The path narrowed as it cut through a small patch of trees that had grown wild along the hill's edge. The rain turned the soil to slick mud beneath our feet, every step threatening to send us sprawling. Katie slipped once, but I caught her before she fell, yanking her forward with everything I had. "Keep going!" I shouted, more to myself than anyone else. We burst out of the trees onto the service road, a narrow, winding asphalt strip that once connected the filtration buildings to the main park. It was cracked, littered with fallen branches and debris from the storm, but it was open. Ahead at the far end of the road loomed the perimeter fence. Beyond that, freedom, or at least distance. Dean saw it too. There! But then came the sound that froze all of us in place. A wet, heavy impact. Behind us, followed by another and another. They weren't walking up the trail. They were climbing it. Not upright, not like people. Like something insectoid, dragging their bodies across the dirt with long, spindly arms that clicked against the rocks. The shapes were growing clearer in the flashes of lightning, limbs unfolding, backs arching unnaturally as they propelled themselves closer. "They're faster now," Katie breathed. "They don't have to pretend anymore," I said. The game was over. We ran again, faster, more desperate, our breath tearing from our lungs in ragged gasps. The fence at the end of the road was topped with barbed wire, too high to climb, but to the left, the old access gate stood ajar, its padlock broken and hanging loose. I didn't stop to wonder how or why. We tore through the opening, stumbling out onto the perimeter field that stretched toward the old access road leading back toward town. The open space was both salvation and terror. No more cover, but at least distance. Dean collapsed to his knees, clutching Olivia as she shook violently against him. Katie doubled over beside me, gasping for air. And then, from the trees behind us, they emerged, no longer trying to hide their forms, pale, elongated, their flesh glistening in the rain like wax figures left too long under a sun that never existed. Their heads stretched into ovoid shapes, no eyes, no mouths, only smooth, blank surfaces that somehow radiated attention. But worst of all was what followed behind them. The ground itself split. A fissure ripped through the dirt like a wound opening wide, and from its depths something far larger rose. An impossible shape, bloated and formless, like a mass of pulsating flesh covered in translucent membrane. Veins the size of tree roots throbbed beneath its surface, carrying something dark and alive through its system. I had seen it once before, in the tunnel. And now, fully above ground, it was no longer content to stay buried. Tommy collapsed to the ground, his voice breaking. "We're dead. We're all dead." "No!" I shouted. "We keep moving." But as I spoke, the ground beneath my feet began to tremble. Soft at first, then stronger, as if the earth itself was rejecting our presence. Katie looked at me, tears streaking her face, eyes wide with something far beyond fear. "What is this place?" she whispered. I swallowed, my throat burning. "It's not a place," I said. "It's a mouth." The earth pulsed beneath us like something alive, like something breathing. I could feel it, warm, rhythmic, pulsing up through my boots. With every shudder, the ground seemed thinner, as though we stood atop nothing but stretched skin. And beneath it, that thing. The mouth. I don't even know if mouth is the right word, but that's what my mind called it, because the alternative was too alien, too monstrous to name. The creatures advanced now, no longer hiding their intent. Their movements were deliberate but unhurried. They knew there was nowhere else for us to run. Dean gritted his teeth, struggling to pull Olivia to her feet again. "We can't outrun them." "We don't have to outrun them," I said, scanning frantically across the open field, searching for anything, any structure, any hiding place. That's when I saw it, the old electrical substation. About 200 yards ahead, half collapsed and overgrown with ivy. The remnants of the power hub that once kept the park running, abandoned after the first major blackout 15 years ago. It was the only solid structure left standing this far out on the property. I pointed. "There, move!" Dean didn't hesitate. He hoisted Olivia up and half carried her across the slick, muddy ground. Tommy scrambled behind him, slipping but forcing himself up with every stumble. Katie gripped my hand tightly as we sprinted, both of us slipping and sliding in the downpour. The ground behind us split wider. I could hear it. The wet tearing sound of earth parting, of whatever lay beneath slithering closer to the surface. A low groan reverberated through the air, not like an animal, but like a pressure system equalizing, as though the earth itself was trying to exhale. And the creatures followed. They moved faster now, their limbs propelling them like grotesque spiders across the mud. Their bodies bent and shifted unnaturally with every motion, like joints dislocating and resetting as they advanced. I didn't dare look back again. The substation loomed closer. Dean reached it first, kicking aside debris as he hauled Olivia into the doorway. Tommy followed, slipping inside just as Katie and I reached the threshold. We collapsed into the crumbling concrete building, gasping, soaked, shivering. The rain pounded against the rusted metal roof above, and the wind howled through the broken window frames. For a brief moment, the world outside disappeared into the storm's roar. Then came the tapping. Soft at first, fingertips or something pretending to be fingertips, scraping against the outside walls. One tap, then another. I pulled Katie deeper inside, past what remained of the old control panels and broken transformers. The entire station smelled of wet rust, mildew, and something sharp. Ozone, like a storm trapped in a metal box. Dean slumped to the ground, holding Olivia as she whimpered quietly. Tommy paced like a caged animal, breathing fast, muttering prayers under his breath. "They're circling," Katie whispered. "I know." My voice felt hollow. "They're waiting for the ground to break fully." Tommy's head snapped up. "Break? What do you mean, break?" I met his terrified eyes. "This land isn't stable. It never was. The park was built to contain the weak spots, to divert the weight above. But all that weight shifted now. The more it moves underneath, the thinner the ground becomes. Eventually..." I stopped, but they understood. Eventually, we fall through. Dean's voice shook. This place, this whole park, it was always meant to feed them. I nodded. Or trap them. Or both. I don't think even the founders fully understood what they were dealing with. The tapping grew louder, rhythmic now. 4 taps, a pause, then 5. Like it was learning, testing patterns, listening. Katie leaned against me, her voice barely audible. What do they want with us? I don't know, I admitted, but it's not just to eat. If it wanted to consume us, it would have done it already. This is something older, some kind of ritual or cycle. The disappearances, the drownings, they're part of it. Dean stared at the broken control panels. The old records, the blackouts, the safety shutdowns. Were those sacrifices? I looked at him. That was the question I'd asked myself for years. The rain intensified, hammering against the metal roof with deafening force. But beneath it, I could still hear them. The wet dragging, the tapping, the breathing of the ground. Olivia suddenly gasped. Her eyes snapped wide open, staring into nothing. Dean shook her gently. Olivia? Hey, stay with me. Her lips moved, barely forming words. There, under the water, she whispered. Her voice was distant, like it wasn't entirely her speaking anymore. Katie leaned closer. What do you mean, Olivia? They see us through the water, Olivia rasped. The pools, the slides, the pipes. We were never safe. It's all connected underground, always watching, waiting for cracks. Then she convulsed, her body shaking violently. Dean held her tighter, panic flashing across his face. She's seizing. I dropped beside them, trying to steady her, but Olivia's body suddenly went stiff, rigid as stone. And then she stopped moving altogether. Her eyes stayed open, blank, unblinking. No, Dean whispered, voice breaking. No, no, no. Katie covered her mouth, stifling a sob. I checked her pulse. There was none, but her eyes remained wide, staring, not empty, focused. I followed her gaze, toward the cracked wall near the far corner of the substation, where thin rivulets of muddy water leaked inside from the ground outside. Through the cracks, something pulsed. Dimly at first, then brighter. A faint, glowing membrane, like the thin skin of some embryonic sac, flexing with each pulse of the ground's breath. Tommy stepped back, trembling. Oh my God, it's inside the walls. Dean collapsed into himself, cradling Olivia's limp body. Katie grabbed my arm, squeezing tight. We have to go, now. The ground trembled again, stronger this time. A fresh rupture split open in the floor behind us, a wet, tearing sound like meat ripping. The storm outside masked none of it now. The entire park was sinking. The mouth was opening wider, the fissure in the floor widened with a sickening rip, belching up damp air that smelled like rotting seawater and something far older, something buried for centuries. The entire substation groaned as the earth beneath it shifted again, like it was trying to shrug us off its skin. We didn't have minutes anymore. We had seconds. Move! I shouted. Katie didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed Tommy's arm and pulled him toward the far wall, where a rusted metal maintenance door leaned crookedly on broken hinges. Dean clutched Olivia's body tightly, still frozen, his eyes wild with grief and denial. Dean, I barked. We can't take her. He looked up at me, eyes glossy, voice small. I can't leave her. You don't have a choice. My voice cracked with desperation. If you stay, you die. She's gone. We're not. The floor buckled again, a deep gurgling echoing beneath us as black water began to seep up from the crack. The first tendrils of that viscous liquid wriggled like living things, as though testing the air. Dean's face crumpled. For a moment I thought he might let himself sink with her. But then, trembling, he loosened his grip. With a final whisper into her ear, he let Olivia's body slump gently to the floor and stumbled after us. We pushed through the maintenance door into another service tunnel, this one narrower, barely wide enough for us to squeeze through single file. The air here was thicker, hotter. Steam hissed from broken pipes overhead, and the walls were slick with condensation that tasted like metal. The tunnel sloped downward, and I knew where it led, deeper, toward the old service court beneath the castle pool. I had spent years mapping these forgotten corridors, obsessed with understanding what lay beneath, but I never imagined I would willingly descend this far into the throat of the nightmare. The ground shuddered again. Tommy stumbled behind us, nearly falling. "How deep does this go?" I didn't answer, partly because I didn't know, partly because the truth would break him. Katie's voice was ragged beside me. "We're going back toward it." "I know," I said. "It's the only way out." Dean rasped behind us, out of breath. "There's no way out down here." "There might be," I lied. It wasn't really a lie, not entirely. There was one more emergency access point, an old elevator shaft the engineers used during early construction. It had long since been sealed and condemned. But if the structure hadn't fully collapsed, it might still offer a way up if we could reach it before the whole place caved in. We pressed forward. The air grew hotter, wetter, and the sound changed. The groans of shifting earth faded beneath a new rhythm. A slow, deliberate thudding like a giant heartbeat echoing through the tunnels. The deeper we went, the louder it became. Tommy whimpered, his voice cracking. "We're inside it!" I couldn't argue. The walls themselves seemed to pulse faintly with each vibration, like breathing tissue instead of concrete. In places, hairline cracks exposed something beneath the surface. Something not quite solid, not quite fluid. Almost like membrane stretched too thin. That's when we saw it. The chamber. The tunnel opened suddenly into a vast underground cavity, much larger than I remembered from the old blueprints. The ceiling arched like the inside of a cathedral, the walls glistening with wet organic sheen. Massive root-like tendrils stretched from floor to ceiling, pulsing rhythmically as fluid pumped through them like veins. And at the center, the mouth. It wasn't a mouth in any way we understood, but there was no other word for it. A gaping, circular void in the center of the chamber, ringed with concentric rows of fleshy, twitching structures that resembled teeth, but were not. They clicked and shifted softly, as if sensing our arrival. Dean stopped cold behind me, his breath catching. "God, it's alive." The heartbeat pounded louder now. Beneath our feet, the floor was no longer solid concrete, but something softer, like walking across thin ice that threatened to give at any moment. Katie gripped my arm, her voice nothing but a desperate whisper. "Daniel, what do we do?" I stared at the pulsing abyss ahead. This wasn't a feeding ground. This was a birthing chamber, a reservoir of everything this place had consumed for decades. Victims pulled through the tunnels, drained, transformed into those things that now walked the surface. This was where it began, and where it would spread, unless we stopped it. "The elevator shaft's behind that wall," I said, pointing toward the far side of the chamber, where a collapsed maintenance bridge lay half submerged in black, viscous liquid. "We get there, we climb." Dean shook his head, panic rising again. "We'll never make it past that." I locked eyes with him. "We have to." A sudden shudder rocked the chamber, and one of the root-like tendrils snapped loose from the ceiling, crashing down into the sludge with a wet slap. The entire cavity groaned as though protesting our presence. The creatures began to emerge from the far tunnels, dozens of them, slithering along the curved walls, their bodies folding and twisting in unnatural contortions. They moved toward us, surrounding us, hurting us. They weren't rushing, they didn't need to. They knew we had nowhere else left to go. I forced my shaking legs to move. "Stay close. Don't stop." We stepped carefully across the unstable ground, every footfall threatening to break through. The stench grew stronger. Salt, rot, and something sweet beneath it, like spoiled meat left in the sun. Kitty stumbled, but I caught her, pulling her forward. The edge of the collapsed bridge was just ahead now. The creatures closed in behind us, and then the mouth pulsed again. But this time, something changed. The membrane at its center began to flex open, revealing a void inside far deeper than we'd ever imagined. Something massive shifted beneath the surface, rising toward the opening like an eye dilating, as if the entire chamber itself was finally waking. The storm above was nothing compared to the storm beneath, and we were standing on its tongue. The mouth continued to open, the rows of fleshy ridges pulled back like the petals of some obscene flower, revealing layers upon layers of writhing tissue inside. From somewhere deep within, a low, guttural groan vibrated through the entire chamber, a sound that didn't belong to anything human, animal, or earthly. Dean whispered behind me, his voice hollow. "This isn't a mouth." He was right, it was something worse. Katie's grip tightened on my arm. Tommy whimpered audibly. Even through my own rising panic, I felt the reality folding inward. We were not inside a place, we were inside it. The park, the tunnels, the pools, the slides. All of it had simply been parts of its body. A construct grown around this thing like skin around a buried parasite. The creatures surrounding us moved closer, forming a shifting wall of limbs and smooth, faceless heads. They weren't rushing, only pushing us gently, inevitably, toward the edge of the opening, herding us like offerings, sacrifices. I yanked Katie forward, stumbling across the last stretch of soft, quivering ground. The collapsed maintenance bridge loomed ahead, a twisted mess of rusted metal and half-submerged concrete. Behind it, just barely visible, was the emergency elevator shaft, our only chance. "Climb!" I shouted. Katie scrambled ahead first, pulling herself over the broken girders with pure adrenaline. I pushed Tommy behind her, then Dean. The creatures pressed in closer now, their long limbs reaching, brushing against my back as I scrambled after them. The bridge groaned beneath our weight, threatening to give way. The quivering surface beneath us rippled with each footstep, like we were running across the surface of a living drum. Katie reached the shaft first, gripping the rusted ladder embedded into the concrete wall. "It's still intact!" she screamed. "It goes up!" I shoved Tommy forward. "Go! Now!" He climbed, feet slipping on the slick metal, but the instinct to survive drove him higher. Dean followed close behind, panting, his knuckles white as he gripped the cold rungs. Katie started next. I hesitated for one breath, just long enough to glance back. The mouth was fully open now, and from within that black, heaving void, something was rising. It wasn't a creature in any way I understood. It was a mass, a coiled, writhing column of pale, translucent flesh that shimmered like oil under the flickering lights. Dozens, maybe hundreds of thin appendages trailed behind it like tendrils of seaweed floating in a slow, deliberate current. It was rising to meet us, or to take us. I climbed. The metal ladder vibrated as I hauled myself upward, every muscle screaming. My breath came in desperate gulps, the walls closing in on either side as the shaft narrowed. Below, I could hear them climbing after us, the creatures. Their slick limbs slapped against the concrete as they scrambled up the shaft like spiders, their faceless heads tilted upward, unblinking. Katie screamed from above. "Faster!" A loud crack echoed below me. I looked down. One of the creatures lunged upward, its long fingers brushing my boot. Another reached higher still, faster than any of us could move. The shaft shook again. The entire structure was starting to collapse. The mouth below was growing, stretching upward as though the entire body beneath was swelling into the vertical tunnel. I forced myself higher, hands burning as I gripped the icy metal. We were only 50 feet from the surface now. The old emergency hatch above us stood partially open, a rectangle of gray light slicing into the darkness. Dean reached it first, shoving the rusted metal flap aside and hauling himself out into the rain-soaked field above. Tommy followed, Katie right behind him. I was next. The creatures screeched beneath me now, their voices sharp and metallic, echoing through the shaft like knives scraping across steel. With one final burst of energy, I pulled myself through the hatch and collapsed onto the wet ground, gasping. But before I could even stand, Katie grabbed my arm and screamed, "Dean!" I spun around. Dean was standing beside us, but his eyes were wide, unblinking. His mouth moved, but no words came out. For a moment I thought it was shock, until I saw the dark tendrils wrapped around his ankle, pulling him back toward the hatch. The thing was reaching for him. The main body had followed us upward. Without thinking, I lunged forward, grabbing Dean's arm and yanking with everything I had. The tendrils tightened around his leg, pulling him inch by inch toward the opening. Katie grabbed his other arm. Tommy grabbed Katie. All of us pulling, screaming. The tendrils throbbed, tightening like muscle contractions. Dean's face twisted into a grimace. He was beyond words now, his eyes darting between all of us, between survival and the void waiting to consume him. And then, with a final, wet, tearing sound, his leg gave way. The tendrils recoiled back into the shaft, dragging only the severed remains of Dean's lower leg with them. Dean collapsed backward into our arms, howling in agony. We pulled him away from the hatch as the ground beneath us cracked again, splitting wide. The entire park was collapsing into itself. The creatures below screamed in unison, a choir of unnatural voices, before vanishing into the widening fissures as the mouths swallowed them back into the depths. The storm above finally broke as the ground sealed itself shut behind us, like a wound scarring over. And then, silence. Only the rain remained, cold, steady, relentless. We lay there in the mud, panting, broken, alive. Katie held Dean as he sobbed into her shoulder, his face contorted in pain. Tommy lay on his back, staring up at the gray sky in numb disbelief. I sat there, watching the ruined field where the mouth had been, and I finally understood. This wasn't over. It never would be. Thank you for joining us on this terrifying journey into the depths of the hollow below. Sometimes the most frightening monsters aren't those we see, but the ones that have been growing quietly beneath us all along. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others who dare to explore the unknown. Your support helps us bring more chilling tales to life, and remember, some places hold secrets better left undisturbed. Stay curious, but stay safe. We'll see you in the next nightmare.